Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is our 102nd meeting that we've had in a row. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be the moderator today, as well as Dennis Speed and Dennis Small, my co-moderators. And I just want to thank everyone who's been a veteran of this process and anyone who's new for 122 weeks of consecutive organizing around the world and coordinating our efforts. The reason why we created this forum 102 weeks ago is to unite the peace movement around the world, because quite frankly, it's been very dysfunctional. There's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of bickering, and I don't want to work with this person or that person. And we're just saying enough. We're going to bring people together into one room. We're going to be mature adults, and we're going to organize and coordinate our activities so we actually can achieve true peace. So thank you, everyone, for doing that. We obviously have a lot going into this coming week and weeks. We've got the conference coming up next week, and I just want to give a heads up to everyone. The IPC meeting for next Friday will be moved to Saturday. So please join us for the conference, which includes many IPC members speaking in the first panel, joining us for the conference in New York, or excuse me, New Jersey. I also want to make sure that people are aware of the massive organizing going on into June 2nd through 4th, which is the Palestinian UN Summit, which is taking place, and we've got to make sure to apply the maximum pressure to get the Oasis plan through. We've had on many people who will be organizing around that summit coming up in June. So please continue to organize and distribute that material. So to start us off today, we're going to have Helga Tsepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Well, let me say hello to all of you. I think the eyes of the world are all directed towards Istanbul, where today, the second day of events there, the meeting between the Ukrainian and the Russian delegation finally took place. It was moderated by the Turkish foreign minister, and the meeting ended after 2 hours. The result is not yet known, at least not to me. Maybe in the course of this discussion, we will find out more about it. In any case, there was an enormous amount of international drama inscenated around it, where everybody in the West was saying, this is a trap for Putin. Now Putin is not showing up. However, leaving all of that theatrics aside, I think it is extremely important that the meeting took place. This was the first direct discussions between Ukrainians and Russians since 3 years, since in March 22, when they already in Istanbul had reached an agreement which would have ended the war after only 1 month, which at that time was sabotaged by Boris Johnson, who flew into Kiev in order to tell President Zelensky, keep on fighting, the entire NATO will back you up. And if you think what an enormous number of people have lost their life, what an enormous destruction of Ukraine has occurred, it is incredible. And therefore, it is very important that these direct negotiations took place. Now, the Russian delegation was consisting out of exactly the same team which negotiated in March 22. Therefore, they obviously knew the territory extremely well. They knew all the ins and outs of difficulties, and therefore they were highly experienced. Zelensky denounced the delegation, saying it was low level and Putin didn't show up. But the Ukrainian delegation, according to some reports from Russian sources, was not an experienced team, and the composition of the team, which was very large, was 80% security officials of various kinds and only 20% politicians or diplomats. So, one could read out of this composition the mindset of both sides. But obviously, this is too early to make a judgment. And in any case, one can expect that the real result will come only from a direct meeting between President Trump and President Putin. The letter just said that he wants to have this meeting as quickly as it can set up, and it could be, within days. So I think that this is a major hope, that this will come to an end. And, I think that the overall dynamic is actually going in the direction of settling conflicts. Now, that is unfortunately not applying for everything. It for sure does not apply to the situation around Gaza, where, as of now, the genocide is in full motion. Tom Fletcher, who is the Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs of the United Nations, he just made a statement saying, that the International Court of Justice is reviewing, if there is genocide going on. And he said, if they don't hurry up, it will be too late because everybody will be dead. And as a matter of fact, the 60-day, or in the meantime, more than 60-day complete shut off of Gaza means, that the 2 days ago, the phase 5 starvation level was true for 22% of all people in Gaza, and phase 4, which is just below immediate starvation but still famine, was the remaining 80% were in level 4. So basically, an unbelievable ratio of dying is going on as a result of hunger, thirst, disease. And, what is being acted out right now is exactly to the letter what Defense Minister Gallant had said on the 9th of October 19 months ago, that there will be a total siege of Gaza because what Israel is confronted with would be, quote, human animals. And obviously that would be enough to dehumanize the entire campaign. So, the situation is beyond description. I think the words of Tom Fletcher that our present world will be judged by future generations, and nobody can say we did all we could, because it would be enough to do one single phone call by the United States to stop that. So the burden of action is on us, on the world community, but especially obviously those powers who could change it with little effort. Now, the situation, therefore, remains one of acute emergency because now the IDF has extended what they are doing in Gaza to the West Bank. There was some incident where a bomb attack occurred against a car with a pregnant woman who was killed. And that was the starting point for the Israeli military to announce that they would level to the ground all the refugee camps and villages where suspected terrorists, in quote, were hiding. So we have now an extension of the genocide of Gaza into the West Bank. So, that is obviously the burning issue for everybody. We have to change. And, otherwise, I would say that the President Trump's efforts may sound, difficult to understand because of his obvious zigzag tendencies. One day saying one thing, the next day doing the other. But if there's any hope, one can conclude then from the fact that the Geneva discussions between the United States and China on the tariffs resulted after only a very short period of negotiations with a positive result. Almost all the tariffs were taken back, going down to something like 10%, which is a minor figure. And the Chinese evaluation was that it was a surprising success, a stunning reversal, surpassing the most optimistic projections, one rare moment of détente in an ocean of tension and friction. And the US tariffs on Chinese products, which were in some categories even up to 245%, were all taken back. And obviously, the comment by the Chinese were that after negotiation, it turned out that the difficulties were not as big as originally anticipated. And one would hope that that is also the case for the Ukrainian for the settlement of the Ukrainian issue, where, given the situation on the battlefield, where, despite the fact that the Ukrainians mount here and there another attack, they are generally clearly defeated already, and all efforts by the so-called coalition of the willing to prop up their fighting capability will not result in a change of the war situation, which is basically lost. So now the only question is, can the dying be ended, and can it be prevented that this is still leading to a escalation, which the coalition of the willing clearly has not yet capitulated to stop their efforts to sabotage this effort. The new Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, originally had said, in a TV show, that Zelensky can completely have confidence in respect to the Taurus on Merz and Germany. Then the Social Democrats protested and said that they have not reversed their position, that they will not agree to the delivery of the Taurus because they don't want Germany to become a war party. And after that, Merz toned it down a little bit and said it's not an acute question now. But in any case, if it comes up in the future, we will not discuss it publicly, because you should not discuss such things in the open. So we have to be on total vigilance and alert, because this would put Germany into a position of a war party immediately. And, as several Russian experts have said, the certain response from the Russian would be to hit an equivalent target in Germany, maybe bridges, if it's the Kerch Bridge, which would be hit by the Taurus, or maybe the factory where the Taurus are produced, and then you would have a full shooting war right in the middle between Germany and Russia, in the middle of Europe. And that danger is not yet ruled out until there is a settlement of the Ukraine crisis, which addresses, as the Russians many times have said, the root causes, and that is the extension of NATO and offensive weapons on the territory of Ukraine, which threaten the national security of Russia. So I think that these are some of the developments which are going on. I just would like to mention two things which are to be kept in mind, because we are not yet in safe quarters. There is a very astonishing and stunning, and I hope that some of the experts from the VIPs probably can comment on that in the course of this discussion. There is an absolutely stunning video by Tulsi Gabbard, the National Director of Intelligence, who is being asked by a reporter if her accusations against Comey, the former FBI director, that he was sort of propagandizing the assassination of President Trump, if she would stick to that. And she said she would, because Comey apparently promoted or distributed an ominous sign which is being used as a symbol for assassination, something like 8646, where the 86 means a sign for assassinations. Now, there was also yesterday in the British press a similar ominous article saying, that it's just a question of time when Putin will go down, and in any case, he could be assassinated. So I'm just mentioning these two things that, we are not yet in safe waters at all, even if we can diffuse the immediate crisis spots, at least in Ukraine and the tariff war. But, obviously, we have to be absolutely mobilized, as we said it before, and as Anastasia just mentioned, on the OASIS plan to be put on the agenda on the June 2 to 4 of July conference in the United Nations. And we have to get the new security and development architecture, which lifts the entire international relations to a completely different paradigm where we replace confrontation with cooperation in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. So these are what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Helga, for that opening and overview. I wanted to share something with people so folks can see, and I can also put this in the chat as well. We'll be having, this is the first panel of the conference that'll be happening next week. And I just want to make sure everyone gets themselves registered. If you plan on going in person, we will be uh, having the end of registration coming up this Saturday. So if you have not registered for the in-person conference, make sure to register today so you can go in person, be part of the dialogue process, be part of a full discussion process with people all over the world who are going to be coming in. So we really look forward to having people on. I'll make sure to include the link in the chat on the Zoom meeting for people to go register. But I also want to if you are not on the Zoom, you can go to schillerinstitute.com and get registered for that as well. So this will be definitely a big stepping off point going into June, as Helga was just mentioning. So, and with that, we have our good friend Ray McGovern, who's just returning from uh, Russia, who will also be speaking at the conference this coming weekend. Not this weekend, next weekend. And thank you so much for joining us again, Ray McGovern, and so glad that you're safe. He's a former CIA analyst and co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Please go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Anastasia. It's a delight to be back with you. Can I be heard okay? Am I
Yes,
being
loud
heard?
and clear.
Okay, good. Well, I had the privilege of being in Russia for two plus weeks recently, and just after I got home, we had Mr. Putin make a very deft move and kind of stalemate what the Europeans, my friend Oliver Boyd Bennett calls the coalition of the willing, the coalition of the brain dead. Uh, I understand that someone very important in Russia called them idiots. Anyhow, they had said, all right, you comply with our ceasefire of 30 days or else devastating, bone-crushing sanctions, okay? Well, it didn't take 24 hours before Putin said to the people who were still there, most of the media was still there. I left the morning, very early in the morning after the May 9 celebrations. So he said, so since you're still here, come on, we'll have a press conference at 2 a.m. in the morning. And that's when he said, all right, we're going to resume where we left off in Istanbul with appropriate adjustments. So that's what's just beginning today. Helga has talked about the composition of the delegations. There is some suspicion in my mind that before Putin made that move and Trump endorsed it, despite some of his colleagues like Kellogg and the others, that there was a degree of coordination here. That if Putin invited this to start, that Trump would overrule his opposition and go ahead. Now, that brings me to a very important point. It does look as though Putin and Trump are dead serious on this. And there's a possibility that if Zelensky continues to play games, aided and abetted by the coalition of the brain dead, led by the British as usual, that Trump will say, "All right, we give it a try. Forget about it. You Europeans, you take care of Ukraine. I'm out of here. It's not my war." But now, Helga also adroitly included, she's a great briefer, you know, she should be briefing presidents. She also included the latest about James Comey, crook, uh, inventor of Russiagate, together with another crook, John Brennan. Now, is Comey in danger of getting into jail? Well, yeah, he is. What does that mean? That means that Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, everyone close to Trump is in danger because James Comey is still a very influential person, and you know he has assets within the deep state that can easily end the whole thing. Now I mention that because Vladimir Putin is also painfully aware of that. He has said that when a new American president comes in, you know, we have expectations, we have hopes, and then the men with the dark glasses and the fancy suits, like I'm wearing, says Putin at the time, and the little attaché cases, they come in and they destroy the whole thing. That's been my experience, says Putin. He said this about 3 years ago. Okay. Now, he's got to be aware of that. So there's an incentive for him to move quickly while Trump is still around, while Tulsi Gabbard is still around, to get a deal done on Ukraine. So I see that as an incentive to move quickly. They think, and they have said explicitly, that Trump is sincere, that they can trust him. And after the series of betrayals on Ukraine, for a president of Russia to say, I think we can trust the Americans this time, that's a big deal. So I'm hopeful that what has started now today in Istanbul, in a show of seriousness on the part of the Russians, whose delegation just won't quit. I mean, it's really impressive delegation, and it's led by the same fellow who led the negotiations back 3 years ago. So there's hope there. What else should be said? Yeah, I should get a little colorful to the celebrations of May 9th, and even before May 9th. Oliver Stone, who invited me to accompany him to Russia this time, for which I'm very grateful. He and I addressed a major rally, what's called a youth forum led by Znania, a, a very countrywide organization trying to educate youth. It was really interesting. They asked good questions. Anyhow, I knew that Oliver was going to talk on the afternoon of the 29th, and I would talk after him on the evening of the 29th. So I dutifully prepared to the degree I usually do with notes to my thing, and it came out all right. I thought actually they really liked the Russian poem that I recited. It was a poem of Russian grief, marking the fact that, yeah, we celebrate the meeting on the Elbe and we celebrate the victory, but there were 27 million Russian citizens or Soviet citizens dead, as compared with 400,000 U.S. on both fronts. So, what did I expect? Well, I didn't expect to hear that Vladimir Putin was going to address the same group the next day. Whoa! I probably would have taken more care in preparing my own little speech had I known that, but he did do that. And I just want to kind of give you a flavor for the Q&A. Now, I don't think the Western press stays around for the Q&A. I don't even think they read it, even though it's immediately available on the Kremlin website. But during the Q&A, there's something very poignant happening here. I'd just like to read you a little bit of the exchange, if I can find it. Yeah, it was a young woman, actually an old girl, I would say, Victoria Agapova. Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Victoria Agapova. I'm from Tambov. I'm a historian. My great-grandfather saved a disabled, self-propelled unit. What he did was he put up a little dummy of himself using his own clothes, and as soon as the Nazis saw that, they shot at it. And my great-grandfather grabbed this thing and brought it back to the lines and saved his comrades. Now, I would have expected Putin to say, wow, you must be very proud of your great-grandfather. No. What did he say? Who told you that story about your great-grandfather? So I'm thinking, whoa, once an intelligence analyst, always an intelligence analyst. You want to know the source of these things, right? So, not aggressively, but who told you that? So she says, my mother told me, because my great-grandfather lived to see my mother born. So, your mother's grandfather? Yes. Amazing, says Putin. I mention this because it's important to pass on information. Now, this is information that very few of us Americans have. Witness the fact that on the Western Front, our veterans lost 200,000 opposed to what the Russians lost. Told you the figures already. Here's Putin. Now, this is kind of poignant if you're open-minded. My mother told me stories about the war, and my relatives passed me a letter from my grandfather during the war to his son. His son was in the army, and the letter was an account of how my grandfather's wife got killed. A bullet hit her in the stomach during the war, and she was dying in his arms, and my grandfather, dying, my grandfather was holding her, and she said, I have mentioned this before. Oh, Putin says, this is really important. She's dying in his arms, and she says, look, don't cry for me. Pursue the battle, do the right thing. Don't make me sad. Don't you be sad yourself. So Putin says, wow, this is a quality that many people have, regardless of nationality. Even as they're dying, they're thinking of other people. Whoa, including Russians. Now, Putin is not living up to his hyper-nationalist reputation here. He would have said, oh, we Russians, we have this special quality. And some people others have it. Well, no, he says, this is universal. This is a human quality, and including the Russians. She knew that she was dying, and she said, don't cry, don't make me sad. In her dying hour, can you imagine? She was worried about my grandfather. At the end of the letter was a little postscript. P.S. Smash those bastards. No, Putin calls that, in the understatement of the century, a motivational phrase. Yeah, a motivational phrase. Okay, now this is the payoff here. I took the letter and I read it. I was an adult. I had been an intelligence officer for nearly 20 years. I did not expect to learn anything new. But when I took the letter and began to read it, I suddenly looked at these past events in a different way. I suddenly felt the fabric of those events, and this must be passed on. Fabric of such events. The Russians have seen war, even if it's just their great-grandfathers or their grandfathers. They all know what war is like. For us, that's a real plus. The other side of it is they know that we don't know what war is like. Now, the celebrations were a very big deal, as you can imagine. 80 years, okay? I was alive. I was 6 years old at the time. I remember VE Day because my father had a colleague who was in the Navy and drove his battleship up the Hudson River, and we were watching. Oh, that was a great day. Okay, so you can imagine 80 years worth. And what does the U.S. and the UK say? Well, we won the war, hands down. We're the most powerful. We were the most powerful. I mean, if you are Russian, would that bother you a little? Well, of course it bothered them. Were they exercised about it? No. They said, well, that's just the way it is. Now, how do I document that? Listening, I was on Red Square. Some of you may have seen my photo up there with some very high Russian dignitaries, courtesy Oliver Stone, of course. But what Putin said on the at the anniversary was really revealing, and I just want to pass this along. You can imagine the pressure he's on. No Western representatives, a lot of pressure on the president of Slovakia and Serbia not to come. They had to go through a circuitous route to get around. Anyhow, here's what Putin says during his little speech. The complete defeat of Nazi Germany was achieved through the combined efforts of all the Allied nations. We will never forget the opening of the second front in Europe, which took place after the decisive battles in the territory of the Soviet Union. The opening of the second front in Europe hastened victory. We highly appreciate the contribution made to our common struggle by the Allied armies, members of the resistance, the courageous people of China, and all those who fought for a peaceful future. Okay, well, my God, after all this defamatory stuff about how the US won the whole war, you would think that he would not be so gracious. He has his big brother Xi Jinping right at his side. He could have lit into the West and said, look, why do you keep on lying with demonstrable lies? There is history. You have alternative facts. For God's sake, forget those alternatives. He didn't do that, okay? And so what am I saying? Well, there's a lesson there for the likes of Ursula von der Leyen or that lady from Estonia. What's her name? Forget her name for a second. But the West ought to wake up. And indeed, the West is the coalition of the brain dead. And it was not so apparent until Putin decided to take this gracious tone. Now, I had just arrived home when I realized that Putin made this very deft move in calling for a renewal of the negotiations in Istanbul, which were almost there. Ukraine had decided not to seek membership in NATO. It was all in the agreement, and Boris Johnson put the kibosh on it. We know exactly what happened because the Ukrainian negotiators, one of them very, very close to Zelensky, told the Ukrainian Times about it, or the Kiev Times. Anyhow, I want to talk about Israel because no presentation, however small, should not talk about genocide. Okay, and actually, when I made my presentation about World War II and Russian-Soviet relations, China as well, I couldn't pass up the opportunity at the end to say, look, all this is important, but even more important is genocide and stopping it. I hope, I said at the time, that the leaders that convene in Moscow can get together and find some way to put the kind of pressure on Israel to stop it, okay? Now, there are cracks in the media. They come very, very late. After all, we're talking October 7th, 2023, right? Came very late, but they're real cracks. It's the Financial Times, it's the Economist, it's the Independent, it's finally the Guardian, and lagging behind as usual, the BBC in England. And that's over the last 10 days. These are real cracks talking about genocides, and we should be ashamed. How about the US? Well, I have a piece up on my website, raymcgovern.com, today, talking about CNN. I compare it to the days of McCarthy, and I have to admit I was alive during those days, and I heard heated discussions about Joe McCarthy in my living room with my father and his colleagues, okay? And I ended up saying, CNN, you should be ashamed, okay? You should be ashamed. Have you no sense of decency? Have you finally no sense of... So look at that CNN thing and see how far behind CNN still is from the Europeans, and notably the British press. What else should I say here? Well, I always kind of felt that, well, I will add this. I will say that um, the question here is whether Trump can be as sensible, in my view, on Israel, whether the little cracks appearing in that venue can be widened to the degree they are now in the mainstream media, at least in England. Uh, and the key to that, I think, is whether things have changed since since 2001. And I mentioned this, some people know about it, but it's really applicable here. There are changes in the US press despite CNN. And there was this recording, 2001, Netanyahu is filling his oats. Uh, he's being videotaped in this very, very pleasant, adulatory atmosphere in somebody's living room. And he says, turn that tape off. And the videographer forgets. We have the tape. It's on YouTube. And this is what he's asked. The woman says, aren't you afraid we're going to be isolated? And I said, no. I know America. They can easily be moved in the right direction. Woman, um, well, are you sure? Because it's really looking pretty bad. Netanyahu, let's suppose that they say something to us, the Americans. So what? So they say it. So what? Get this now. Quote, 80% of the Americans support us. It's absurd. We have such support there. And he goes on. All right. Now, is it 80% today? No, it's not. I don't know what it is, but I have great trust in the basic character of the ordinary American citizen. And I don't think they like people getting killed, as was the case in Germany in the 30s and 40s, and now is the case in Gaza. So I think that to the degree that 80% figure has been whittled down to below 50%, I dearly hope and pray there's hope. I just mention that because we need to have hope. Finally, I would say that I've always been reluctant to identify myself with all that the Schiller Institute has said about the British. Why? Well, because I'm preconditioned to believe really bad things about the British. After all, I'm Irish. If two of my great grandfathers hadn't survived the British imposed hunger, starvation, I wouldn't be around, okay? But now, sign me up, sign me up. And none other than Jeffrey Sachs puts it really into perspective. I refer you to his latest speech. I think it was in Cyprus, but he talks about how the British have been responsible for just about every evil that's happened internationally for the last 200, 300 years. So thanks for letting me go on like this. I'm a little groggy, but I'm home. I'd like to finish with one thing from St. Augustine. Some people say St. Augustine. We have to hold the new Pope accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable. I mean, if Augustine or Augustine, back so many centuries ago, had it right, we ought to get it right too. He said we ought to have hope, and that hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger to watch the things the way they are, and courage to make sure they don't remain the same as they are. I think a new dawn is breaking here. Slivers of light are breaking through, even in our media. What is it, the 102nd time we've been meeting? My God, we're making an impact, folks. Please come on the 24th. I'll be there, God willing. And thanks again, Anastasia, and all of you for giving me a chance to talk.
Thank you so much for that uplifting and very inspiring presentation, Ray. And so glad that you were able to go and present these ideas. It's very important that you were there. And actually, just to pick up off of what you ended on, I think it's actually very timely that we have on Maoz Inon, who is, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, I apologize.
Okay.
But he's an Israeli peace activist, and he was one of the organizers going into the People's Peace Summit in Jerusalem. If people have not had a chance to see that, I definitely recommend taking a look. It's very important, and these cracks that Ray and others were talking about that's happening in the media, I think is, anyway, it's very important with what Mr. Anan has been doing. So please, thank you for joining us, Mr. Anan, and please go ahead.
Hi, Anastasia. Thank you, Ray, and thanks for everyone here in this webinar. I will start where just where Ray ended. That hope is an action. And I'm an Israeli. I lost my parents on October 7th. I lost many of my childhood friends. And I partner with Palestinians that also lost family members and loved ones in the over a century-long conflict. And we are saying that hope is an action that we are creating together by envisioning a better future and working together to make it into a reality. And exactly like Ray said, each one of us should be accountable. We cannot wait for the Messiah. We cannot wait for the prophets. We cannot wait for angels. Each one of us here, we are 222 people in these webinars. Each one of us need to be the Messiah. Each one of us need to act as an angel, and each one of us need to act as a prophet. So if enough people will act upon those values and will be courageous and brave enough, we're going to achieve peace by 2030. This is our mission, to achieve peace between the river to the sea by 2030. And before I start sharing my reflection from the very important People Peace Summit that we held just last week in Jerusalem, I would like to share 2 slides which show our theory of change. Okay, so I'll do sharing here. Then I'm sending a request for sharing. Where is it? I think it's here. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So we have 5 steps, theory of change to make our dream of peace into reality. First, we must dream. The second is to agree on our shared values and common ground. And over a year ago, 70 of us, Palestinian Israelis, were meeting in Geneva for 3 days, and we said, let's put aside, let's put behind the past and the present, let's just find our common ground towards the future. And we reach a set of values: equality and dignity, shared acknowledgement and recognition, reconciliation and healing, security and safety. So afterwards, when we have our big dream of a lasting peace, and we're going to build over our values, we start building a coalition. And this is why it is so important for me to speak with you, because we are forming a very strong coalition on the ground, Israelis and Palestinians, that I will go into more detail soon, but we must have international partners with us in the coalition. And I think all of you are much more knowledgeable and experienced with conflict resolutions and diplomacy and advocacy. I was a businessman and entrepreneur till October 7th. But I shift totally into peace building. and we need to form a very powerful coalition of policymakers, of civil society organization, ex-diplomats, reconciliation experts, etc., that together we're going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The fourth step is to have a roadmap or a plan, because while we have seen the promised land in our dream, we don't know how to get there. So we must have a roadmap. Otherwise, we keep walking in loops, like it took the Israelis 40 years to walk through the desert from the Mount Sinai event till they enter the promised land. It's a walk that can take only 11 days, but because they had no plan. So now we must have a plan to reach the promised land by 2030. We cannot wait any longer. And my next slide will be about our plan. And then we must start walk the talk and execute our plan. So this is exactly what we are doing. And the next slide is our 5-chapter plan for achieving peace. It's starting from the basic, and this is again to dream big. In the last in the months that passed since October 7th, we met with faith leaders as Pope Francis, policymakers, spiritual leaders, academy, and common people on the ground. And now I'm convinced now that the only way to change reality is by dreaming. The field of dream is where those who change reality and change humanity play. So for too long, we, the moderate in Israel and Palestine, we start dreaming, and our past and present were hijacked by the extremists. And the extremists on both sides, they dream, and they dream big, and their dream is the same. It's displacement, it's ethnical cleansing, it's ethnical supremacy, and it's erasing the other side. They share the dream, and their dream is our nightmare. So now, for the first time in decades, we, the civil society within Israel, hi Eden, just a second, 5 minutes. So for the first time in decades, we, the civil society, the peace camp in Israel and Palestine, shift and position himself in the field of dream. The second chapter, and this is why it's so important for me to speak to you, is to amplify our dream. We are proud of our dream, and we need to shout it. We need to spread it. We need everyone to amplify our voices. The third is to build our legitimacy. Both people, if you ask Israelis or Palestinians, they will tell you, yes, we want peace, but it's just the naive are wishing for peace. There will be no peace in our lifetime. Peace is impossible. So we need to build the legitimacy to peace, and we can do it through big events, through media, through meeting with world leaders, policymakers, and those who already hold and have a legitimacy. And the fourth chapter is a policy change. The entire world is investing now in tools of destruction. This is exactly what Trump was doing at the Emirates and Saudi, selling weapons. But those weapons, when we saw weapons, we're going to harvest bloodshed. It's just a matter of time. And we must change policy, definitely in the Middle East, but worldwide, to start investing in dialogue, reconciliation, shared life initiatives. And we were very happy that the foreign minister of the EU, Aya Kallas, announced on last Friday as endorsement in our summit. She announced 18 million euro fund for the civil society within Israel and Palestine. It's a great start, but it cannot stop there. The EU invested billions, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but billions in the conflict resolution and implementation in Northern Ireland. So this is, we cannot, it won't be enough to deal with the amount that is being invested in tools of destruction. We must invest more in tools of construction. And the fifth chapter is to create the political will. I'll go back to you. To create the political will. I don't know who's going to make peace. I cannot know. But no one could dream 19 months after October 7th, after October War in 1973, that it will be Menachem Begin that will welcome Anwar Sadat on his historical visit to Israel and Jerusalem. Menachem Begin was a wanted terrorist. He commanded more than 300 attacks against the British during the time of the mandate and against the Arab population. Many civilians were killed on his attack. But 39 years after, he is receiving Anwar Sadat and declaring that we can prevent war, but we cannot prevent peace. We can prevent war, but we cannot prevent peace. Peace will definitely happen. So now we are following the legacy of Menachem Begin to make peace with our enemies. And at the moment, our enemies are the Palestinians, and we as civil society doing what our politicians, there are no leaders in Israel and Palestine, okay? There are no leaders, there are only politicians. For me, the differentiation between politician to leader is that politician is following the discourse in order to win vote. And a leader can change the discourse. And Menachem Begin changed the discourse completely. The night before Anwar Sadat arrival, the majority of Jewish Israelis, more than 70%, were against negotiation with Egypt. The discourse was that Egypt wants to erase the state of Israel and there will be no peace in our lifetime. And Moshe Dayan said it's better to have Sinai Peninsula without peace than peace without Sinai Peninsula. And by night, it changed completely. 2 years after the peace treaty was signed, Israel withdrew with the Sinai Peninsula, and it's one of the second borders that is secure and safe. If you ask me what do Israelis care about, it's only two very simple things. Jewish Israelis care only about security and safety. Nothing else. Nothing else. And if we'll be able to assure that they will be secure and safe, they will be willing, even nowadays, to compromise for a lot. So in order to implement our theory of change, we created last year a coalition of 60 civil society organizations. Some of you might heard about Standing Together, Combatant for Peace, Women Wage Peace, Women of the Sun, and many rabbis from human rights, but so many others. We created a coalition because we realized if we won't be synchronized, we're not going to make it. So we have a coalition and a steering committee. And the People Peace Summit in Jerusalem last week was basically the third event. We rented the most prestigious venue within Israel in Jerusalem, where usually the far right is doing his gathering. We've decided we're going to bring peace to Jerusalem. We're going to bring peace to the ICC, International Conference Center in Jerusalem. And 2 days event, multi-location, where the video from Macron, video from Kallas, video from Abu Mazen, and it was beautiful to see both Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, Jewish Israelis, youth and elderly coming together, stating on the stage, we must end the war. We must end the war now. It's already too late for so many, for too many. We must end the war. We must make a deal. And we must start a peace process. That's the only way to move forward. And that's how we created great hope by envisioning a better future. We were also doing a diplomatic launch with more than 30 ambassadors attend, and I think 80 or even more deputy of mission. So we are also working with our own people, Israelis and Palestinians, and with the international community to form a very powerful coalition. And on Sunday, we have a full day of reflection to decide of our next action. I hope we're gonna, the next initiative will be a peace walk on September 21st, the International Day of Peace. Half of the march will come from East Jerusalem, half of the people would come from West Jerusalem, and together we're going to meet on the borders, on the line of 67 to declare that the wall of oppression, the wall of occupation, the wall of revenge, fear, and hate must be broken. And we are building now a bridge that is based on equality, reconciliation, justice, and peace. So this is on a nutshell what we are doing, and I will put my also my details here, my LinkedIn, my Linktree and LinkedIn. I don't want your thoughts. We don't need your thoughts. We don't need your prayers. We need your action. We need your partnership, and together we're going to achieve. We can end a century-long conflict, and I think the ripple effect of a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine that will be celebrated at the holy city of Jerusalem gonna empower the peace coalition and the peace camp worldwide. And we can achieve it, and we will.
Thank you so much, Maoz Inon, for that presentation and for all the work that you're doing in Israel. It's clearly making an impact. And I know you have to go. You're very busy.
I have like 10, 15 minutes.
Good, great.
Okay,
I wanted to,
it's Friday evening here. Friday, usually we have a family dinner. And since my wife is not here, we are going to friends and the kids are already waiting for me. But I have 10 more minutes.
Great. I wanted to go to Helga real quick and see if you have a response to Mr. Anan before he has to leave.
Well, naturally, I full-heartedly support what you are doing, and I think I can commit most forces of the International Peace Coalition to do likewise. I have a slightly different thing. Maybe I should bring this in shortly before you are leaving, and that is that I have written an open letter to His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. And, given the fact that you, Ray, mentioned the generosity of Putin by addressing the contribution of the Allied forces to the victory over the Nazis, maybe you can forgive me that I'm not criticizing Pope Francis for what he did not, but that I'm building on what he did. So let me quickly read it. It's very short, and I would actually like people to listen to it and read it, because if we could assemble out of this present discussion as many signatures to that, to start to unite all religions and people of goodwill around this peace idea, to create a real international peace movement, the better. So, open letter to His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. We, the undersigned, wholeheartedly welcome Your Holiness in your pontificate in our present extremely turbulent time, and appreciate the fact that your first words were, "Peace be with all of you." Not only are regional conflicts raging in many parts of the world, several of those have the potential of escalating to a nuclear Armageddon, which would end civilization and thus represent the ultimate sin against God's creation. You offer to facilitate peace talks among countries at war, continuing the mandate of Pope Francis, who had made peace the urgent demand in his last Urbi et Orbi message, and who had denounced so many times the arms trade and condemned those who profit from war. We wish to communicate to Your Holiness our commitment to try everything in our power to reach out to all Christians as well as believers of other religions and world outlooks, to unify in the effort to establish a true peace order in the world, which eliminates the root causes for war by taking into account the valid security interests of all parties. We also fully support your rejection of the Manichaean notions that divide people in good and evil, because they deny the chance to overcome evil through development. We support this idea that the new name for peace is development. So maybe if as many of you participating in this can sign this, we could really start an international mobilization, to try to get many, many, many forces involved in this peace effort.
Yeah, definitely. And again, we also created before the last G7 meeting in last June in Italy, we asked Pope Francis to sign a letter to the G7 leader, and he's done it, and supported our call for investment in the civil society within Israel and Palestine, and it took nearly a year for the first action that was made last week by Foreign Minister Kallas to be implemented. But I think when we group together and we understand it's not, if there is a war, it will expand. It's not going to stay just like fire. So together, again, if we'll be happy to coalesce with your organizations and with other. And it's very important for us that the world would know that there is a growing peace camp. There is a growing peace camp within Israel and Palestine.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We'll make sure to get that to you. I do want to acknowledge Scott. I do see you there, Scott Ritter, who's our next speaker. But I understand that Ray, you probably have a response as well to Mr. Inon. If not, that's fine. I heard you. I saw you sort of raise your hand.
So please forgive me. I wish you, okay, I will listen to you, Ray, and then I must excuse myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to say that we can all hope, but we must also press for action. Now, if you look at St. James's Gospel, he says words without action, well, he condemns them very, very, very much. So this time we need not blah, blah, blah. We need not expressions of hope. We don't even need extended offers of mediation. What we need is for the Pope to take the moral leadership to condemn what's going on in Gaza and not fall back on the words that his predecessor used. Well, let's have an investigation as to whether there might be genocide. There is genocide, and every moral leader should be preaching that from the pulpit. The jury is out on Pope Leo. Let's hope and pray that he does more than words.
I cannot agree more, and this is exactly what we are saying to world leaders and policymakers. Since October 7th, we need your actions. Not to cross your fingers, not to pray, not your thoughts. Action. It's already too late for too many people.
I would say pray is okay.
Yeah, of course, that's it, but it's not enough. I'm not there, yeah.
But we need action mostly. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Mr. Inon, and thank you for joining us. Oh, Helga, I see your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Ray, to add that argument in this text, if you want.
Wonderful. I see Ray giving the thumbs up. He's saying yes. Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I was muted. I just wanted to say thanks for the initiative. Of course, I'll add a sentence or two, and I certainly will sign, as I hope others will do.
Wonderful. This has been a great working session, apparently. So we look forward to this letter going out very soon. So I'd like to continue with the discussion because we do have Scott Ritter on, who is a very excellent organizer. He's been doing quite a bit discussing the how to actually get true peace with many nations around the world, the pants off people about what true nuclear war really looks like. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott. Please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I was asked to come today to provide my assessment of the um, Ukrainian-Russian negotiations that apparently just wrapped up for the day, at least in Istanbul. I have to watch my language because there are certain terminologies that's used to reflect a mess, and it is a mess. It's a mess made so by the fact that only one side has a clear vision on what is necessary to bring an end to the conflict, and that's the Russian side. They have articulated their vision quite clear, and their vision is not negotiable. So anybody who thought that these would be negotiations or that there will be negotiations going forward, I think the Russians made it clear that there are no negotiations, that the Russians have a very hardline position that there will be no deviation from. In fact, the Russians have made it clear, for instance, that their baseline for beginning any serious discussion about how to bring the conflict to an end is that Ukraine must recognize Russia as defined by the Russian Constitution. That means that at a minimum, Ukraine will recognize that Crimea, the totality of Kherson, the totality of Zaporizhia, the totality of Donetsk, and the totality of Lugansk are part of Russia and will forever be part of Russia. And Russia is also insisting that Ukraine's Western controllers likewise recognize this as a precondition for conflict termination. And Russia said a couple interesting things in response to Ukrainian balking at this, that if Ukraine turns this down, it's not going to be 4 the next time. Now, the rumor was 5, but it's been clarified now that Russia said the next time there will be 8 territories that Russia will demand. And this is in keeping with what I've always said, that Ukraine has an opportunity now to end the war, understanding that it has lost the war and that this is the best deal they're ever going to get. A while ago, I talked about what I called the Odessa moment. That is, there will become a time in the fighting when Russia will hit pause and give the Ukrainians a chance to accept their defeat. And when Ukraine refuses, or if Ukraine refuses, then Russia will make the decision to pivot and take Odessa. We are at the Odessa moment now. I think Russia feels that Ukraine is on the verge of collapse on the military front. The Ukrainians understand they are on the verge of collapse in the military front. There's nothing the West can do to help them. The United States is gradually coming over to the reality that this conflict must be dealt with not from the lens of what the West wants, but what the reality demands. And the reality demands that the West will have to yield to Russia's demands, because the other thing that Russia said is we are ready to continue this war for as long as it takes. We fought Sweden for 25 years. I said 25, 27 years. We will go here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as long as it takes. Are you prepared to go for as long as it takes? They asked the Ukrainians. The answer, of course, is no. Ukraine isn't. So these were the talk coming out from Kiev and et cetera, is that they feel they walked into a Russian trap, and they did. But they had no choice, because Russia also said that if Ukraine walks away from this, that there will never be another negotiation, ever. We are at a culminating point right now. I think we're going to find that the West is, has been putting out a lot of, I guess we'll call it meaningless flexing, from Europe. It's interesting. We just had a French general pass away a couple days ago, Delouarte, who is a man who, if you had listened to him, he has been saying some reality about France. For instance, he has said for some time now that the best France could ever do is put 13,000 man division deployable. I've been saying that for some. I use 12,000. I guess the French can conjure up an additional thousand men. But that's it. That's the most France will ever be able to deploy in its current configuration. And the French army is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. The Germans are incapable of any deployment. The British are incapable of any deployment. Europe is incapable of any deployment. So this notion that there will be this 25 to 60,000 strong European force in Ukraine is just talk. It's blather. It's meaningless. It has no value. And it's the same with every aspect of what the Europeans have been talking about. 800 billion euro to expand their military is a non-starter. They don't have the money. They don't have the industrial base. They have nothing. But they've been putting it out there, I guess, in hopes that the United States would pick up on this lead and somehow strong arm Russia. And the United States has been playing a standoffish game with Russia in the weeks ago. Russia just called the United States' bluff. You know, you had the United States say that the Russian demands were non-starters. Russia just made them the only starter. Russia will never go back on its negotiating position. And this is now the truth that Trump has to deal with. He can't be sending Witkoff and Kellogg over to send contradictory messages. Rubio's not going to be able to twist Lavrov's arm. The Russians now have committed to a policy position, and the United States has to recognize this reality or walk away. And Russia has also made it clear what the consequences of walking away will be. Russia will not yield, which means when the United States walks away, it has a choice either to abandon Ukraine in Europe or to double down and provide weaponry and support greater than that which had been provided by Biden, thereby contradicting and canceling out a major campaign promise by Donald Trump. So the feeling right now is that Ukraine has no choice, that they will have to yield to the Russian demands. There is talk in Kiev right now that this process may take up to 5 weeks, but at the end of the 5-week period, Ukraine will concede the basics of the Russian demands and then seek in negotiating the conditions for a ceasefire, because Russia will not accept a ceasefire until all conditions are met. They will try to retain what they can retain in hopes that the Russians will be in a benevolent mood to maybe allow the Ukrainian army to be of a certain size. I doubt that's the case, though. I think Ukraine has lost. I think we're looking at the collapse of the Ukrainian position. I think we're looking at the collapse of Europe's ability to backstop Ukraine. And I think we're looking at the end of American resolve. Trump administration wants this over with, and now Russia has provided, by standing firm, the conditions under which this conflict can end. And I think you're going to see the United States working with Russia to achieve this objective. So while some people may call this a bad outcome, I call it a good outcome, because we now have the real prospects of peace, because the only alternative is war. And Russia is, when I call it the Odessa moment, it's not just the political decision to take additional territories. Russia is assembling the military might capable of doing that, and the political foundation for application of force, meaning that I believe Russia, if they are compelled to go forward, will probably terminate what we call the special military operation and begin war. A war designed to not defeat Ukraine, but to destroy Ukraine. And a war where Russia would react violently to any efforts by the West to intervene. It would be a very dangerous situation. We see the potential of this with Estonia carrying out acts of piracy under the pretense that somehow NATO will back them up. If Russia goes to an act of war, you may see an act of desperation by France as they seek to, for instance, because they have inadequate manpower, they try to impose some sort of air intervention operating out of Romanian airfields. And this could lead to not only Russia destroying the French Air Force, but attacking a NATO facility in Romania, bringing up Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Very dangerous situation. And I think the realists in the Trump administration understand the danger of this, which is why I hope we see in the coming days pressure from Trump on Zelensky and on the Europeans to come back to the table and accept Russia's demands on the fortune. It's the best deal Ukraine's going to get. It'll only get worse from here. Just like the better deal would have been the one Ukraine could have had in 2022, but they walked away from that. Russia's making the case. Ukraine didn't want to hear the message, but Russia's making the case now that this is the best it's going to get for you. And if you go forward, it will be so much worse. And I think that message is being resonated. There's talk now, we'll see, of a phone call between Trump and Putin tonight. But there's definitely the Trump even now being briefed on what the Russian demands are, is saying there must be a meeting between him and Putin soon. And I think Trump wants to head off Russia taking action on the Odessa moment. I think Trump understands now, and it hopefully is being fully briefed on the reality of the situation, and that this has to end now, which means Trump has to put all the pressure on Ukraine and on Europe. Now, no pressure on Russia. There will be no pressure on Russia. Russia just made itself pressure proof because they will not tolerate anybody telling them that their position is unacceptable, because Russia's made it clear, if you say this, then we aren't negotiating anymore and we're going on to the next phase. And I think for now, even Marco Rubio seems to understand this reality. So that's where I stand on this. Again, this is a very fresh take. The negotiations literally just ended. And this is my first brush. More statements could come out that could prompt me to have to alter this analysis. But based upon what the Russians have said, I think that my assessment is pretty solid.
Thank you for that, Scott, for your response. I see Ray McGovern, you have your hand up, and I'd also would like to see if Helga has a response. But Ray, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much. I don't think you're going to have to alter your analysis here. I think it's pretty firm, and you've very seldom had to alter your analysis on these matters. I would like to pick up on the Odessa moment. As you know, I'm one of those weird people that read everything that Mr. Putin says, okay? And let me take us back to 2.5 years ago. After the Istanbul agreements fell apart, Mr. Putin had one of these 3.5-hour Q&As after a talk. And at the very end, I'm sure that the Western media had left by then and didn't take the trouble to read the text. Putin had a very, very interesting observation about Odessa. Let me bring it up here. I think I can bring it up so I can read it. Yeah. There was a correspondent there. This may have been a planted question. I don't know. Gabor Stier. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. President Putin. One of my favorite cities is the post-Soviet space of Odessa. What do you think? I want your advice. If I wanted to visit Odessa next summer, do you think that I should apply for a Russian or for a Ukrainian visa? Whoa, pretty clever, huh? Okay, here's Putin. You know, Odessa indeed is a beautiful city. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. See if I can capture this thing again. As you know, Odessa was founded by Catherine the Great. Odessa can be an apple of discord. The Russian was Yabloko Razdora, Yabloko apple, Razdora. It's an allusion way back to the Trojan Wars, for God's sake, okay? An apple of discord, or a symbol of conflict resolution, a symbol of finding some kind of solution to everything that's happening now. It's not a question of Russia. We have said many times we're ready to negotiate, and I recently mentioned this publicly in the Kremlin. But the leaders of the Kiev regime have decided not to continue negotiations with the Russian Federation. That's the end of Istanbul 1. It is true that the final word belongs to those who implement Kiev policy in Washington. It is very easy for them to solve this problem, to send the appropriate signal to Kiev that they should change their position and seek a peaceful solution to these problems, and that will do it, end quote. So spake Vladimir Putin on October 27th, 2002. Okay? Now, why do I mention that? Because, well, it used to be that people recognized that what the president of Russia said mattered. Okay? So, with respect to the Odessa moment, I think this is the moment. I don't think the Russians want to destroy Odessa. I think they'd rather negotiate. Now, Odessa is necessary for Ukraine to be a viable country. It's their only access, really, to the Black Sea. Otherwise, they end up as kind of a breadbasket, a kind of a farm for the rest of Europe. So there's leverage, there's opportunity there. And I just hope that you mentioned it again, Scott. I'm really glad you did. I just hope that people could read these things and could read Putin the way that Scott and I do and say, look, listen to him. Yeah, he has firm demands, but he also has flexibility. And Odessa is one of them. And so is Nikolaev, and so is Kharkov. And there may be a few other pieces of flexibility. So, as Scott said, now's the time. Get the best deal you can. You're not going to get any better deal. And what has to happen is Trump needs to talk not only to Zelensky, but to the coalition of the brain dead, Macron, Starmer, Merz, and talk to those guys and say, look, it's over. It's up to you if you want to take up this war. We didn't start it. We're going to end it. Thanks, Scott, for taking us through the immediate results of what happened today.
Just to follow up on what Ray said, there are, in talking to Russians over the course of the last several years, the Odessa moment. First of all, Putin has said repeatedly that Odessa is a Russian city, and many people have picked up on that, saying that, well, Russia will never give up Odessa. But the Russians have made it clear in their conditions here that they are only interested in those territories that are constitutionally Russian, meaning that they're not demanding that Odessa be turned over to them, Kharkov be turned over to them, even though these are Russian cities. But I think when they talk about a ceasefire and the difficult conditions attached to that, one of the things that will be is the demilitarization of Odessa, the demilitarization of Nikolaev, the demilitarization of Dnipropetrovsk, the demilitarization of Kharkov and Sumy. That doesn't mean that Russian troops come in, but it means there will be no Ukrainian troops on these territories. There might be Ukrainian police, border guards perhaps, but no Ukrainian army. And there will be a mechanism of monitoring. The other thing that goes into this, Ray speaks about economic viability. The former prime minister of Ukraine, whose name escapes me at the moment, who fled to Russia and is currently there heading up one of the government bodies in exile. When I spoke to him about the future of Odessa and Kharkov, two Russian cities, and whether or not Russia would seek to acquire these cities, a precondition of conflict termination, he said that the argument being put forward by Ukrainians is that Ukraine must be allowed to retain Odessa, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Sumy, because these are territories that are absolutely essential for Ukraine to survive as an industrial nation and a nation with a viable economy, that the economic survival of Ukraine depends especially on Odessa being in Ukrainian hands. Right. And the conversation with Russian leaders is such that they are looking at a post-conflict reality that is based upon the need for Ukraine to reconstitute itself, to rebuild itself, And how is that going to happen? The key aspect of that is the economy of Ukraine, whether or not the Ukrainian economy can be revived and can contribute to the reconstitution of Ukraine, the rehabilitation, the reconstruction of Ukraine. So the Russians are looking not to occupy Ukraine, not to steal Ukraine away, but a way that makes Ukraine non-threatening to Russia, but a continued part of Ukraine. This is very benevolent on the part of Russia, especially if you understand the political winds that are blowing inside Russia amongst the population. Right now, a very popular move would be for Putin to say, I'm taking Odessa. He would have the support of a good part of the Russian people. But that's not in Russia's interests. And it shows how responsible the Russians are when it comes to trying to negotiate conflict termination. Now, I'm not naive. I also believe that Russia understands that they have a plan B in place, which is to take advantage of the political reconstitution of Ukraine and create the opportunity for post-conflict referendum in Odessa, Kharkov, where the will of the people could manifest their desire to leave Ukraine and join Russia. But that's down the road. I actually think that aspect could be handled by a good negotiating team, meaning that if I were the Ukrainians, I would go to the United States and say, I need guarantees there isn't going to be a post-conflict referendum here. I know the United Nations speaks of, we have to recognize the will of the people and self-determination and all that, but we need guarantees that Ukraine is Ukraine, that the borders we have are the borders we're going to keep, and that we're not going to get chiseled away by the Russians. And that's what a good Ukrainian negotiating team would be looking for right now. And that's something I actually think the United States could play a role in, to tell the Russians, yeah, no trickery here. The borders are the borders now and forever. And I think the Russians would agree to that, because the Russians do want this conflict to come to an end, but they will never sacrifice an inch of Mother Russia. And constitutionally, Kherson, Zaporizhia in their totality, including the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea, are Mother Russia, and Russia will not give up a single inch. It's ironic just to point out that had the Ukrainians accepted the 2022 peace plan, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant would be Ukrainian, along with all of Zaporizhia and Kherson. And it just shows how foolish they are, and why the United States needs to emphasize to them today that if you walk away from this, we wash our hands, because you're just simply going to throw away the best deal you have available.
Right. No, thank you for that. No, it's very important that you're bringing this to the discussion. I wanted to go to Helga to see if you had a response.
Well, I think one should also consider the larger picture, which is, before the war broke out, there was the potential of Ukraine playing the role of a bridge between Asia and Europe by the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative corridors and the EU association agreement, which was the trigger for the Maidan coup, was designed to interrupt that and prevent that from happening. So now, after 3 years of war, the BRICS has grown tremendously. The development corridors within the BRICS have grown. And in the meantime, Brazil and China have also made a proposal for a peace proposal for Ukraine. Now, it is quite conceivable that if we move in the direction what the IPC and the Schiller Institute have been advertising for, since the beginning of this effort, to have a new security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every country on the planet. In that context, one could conceivably think of an economic integration of Eurasia. President Putin has spoken repeatedly in the recent period that he sees as a result of the Ukraine war, or the special military operation, as he puts it, the potential for a new Eurasian security system. And on June 14th of last year, he even said the potential for a global new security system. So in that context, it is quite conceivable that the concept of the corridors of building the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war in the context of the Eurasian land bridge of development projects which unite Europe and Asia as the economic basis for this new Eurasian security system. And in that case, I think the whole dynamic would shift to what I said is the case for Gaza, that the new name for peace is development. I think that same idea that the new name for peace is development also applies for the resolution of such problems like what will happen to Odessa.
I'll just respond. I'm all for peace and development and good outcomes and all that. The United States will never allow Ukraine to become part of a BRICS.
I'm so sorry. Hey, Mike, stop.
Oh, can I be
No.
heard? No.
You can be heard. Yeah. There we go. I apologize for that.
No problem. I'm just, the problem is we are in a moment of, a huge geopolitical change, and we're early enough in the Trump administration where we can't just write him off. And the United States will not tolerate any transition out of conflict that has Ukraine becoming something that strengthens Russia's position in Eurasia. So as much as I support the idea of that, I don't see that happening. I see the United States seeking to keep Ukraine in the European orbit as much as possible. Again, this might be one of the compromises that has to be made to bring about an end to the conflict. Because otherwise, then there's no reason for the United States to support peace at this point in time, because Ukraine has tremendous geopolitical potential. It's right there at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, and I just don't see the Trump administration just yielding the totality of Ukraine's potential to Russia and China at this critical moment. I think we see in the U.S.-Ukrainian mineral deal, as meaningless as it is, what the political ambition of the United States is towards keeping its hooks in. And I think that Russia is more than happy to pay a reasonable price to keep dialogue between the United States and Russia continuing. And to me, that's the most important factor out of all of this. It's the only thing that counts at this point in time, is keeping America and Russia talking in a meaningful fashion. And if this conflict can come to an end, then we can get on to things like arms control. We can get on to things like demilitarize the points of contention. So I think that's the direction this is heading. I don't see the United States, especially under Donald Trump, doing anything that empowers BRICS or these European or Eurasian Economic Union and things of that nature, because we view those as economically threatening. But we'll see. If you have total Russian victory, that would be 3 or 4 years from now. Then of course Russia will be able to dictate the outcome, and then these potential. But to get to that would be so much death and destruction, the potential of general warfare between Russia and Europe, and a deterioration of U.S.-Russian relations. Right now, the number one goal of everybody in the planet should be continuing viable dialogue between Russia and the United States. That is the most important thing right now, because from that, only good things can happen. But if something happens that shuts down that dialogue, only bad things will come of that.
Just
Go ahead.
one brief comment. Since the whole aim of the International Peace Coalition is to get the world to a new paradigm, a new security and development architecture in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, which ended 150 years of war in Europe, by creating a system which took into account the interest of the other, and that is of every other country. I do not rule out the possibility, and that would obviously require now a larger discussion, that the United States could shift to cooperate with the BRICS once they realize that they gain much more advantage in doing so by cooperating with the global majority of the world than remaining in a geopolitical mindset. Now, that may sound improbable right now, but the trend of the world is going so powerfully in that direction that I'm hopeful that this will also be possible to include the United States in a completely new security and development architecture.
Could happen. It just won't be under a president named Trump. That's guaranteed. And I just don't think anybody should hope for any other outcome. Trump will never, ever, 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 and we can go on with all the evers in the world, do anything that empowers BRICS. J.D. Vance, I place my hope in J.D. Vance because he is he's a more realistic person, and he's developing a greater reality-based understanding of the world we live in. He understands the limits of American power and the need for the United States to work in a constructive fashion with the global community. So here I see your IPC vision actually having potential to take hold. So what I would recommend is that that you think strategically in terms of how to position your initiative so that it can be introduced realistically to a post-Trump administration, as opposed to trying to jam it down Trump's throat right now. That's a non-starter. Donald Trump just isn't in the in the globalization BRICS game. That's just my take. Maybe other people feel differently about him, but I don't see anything about what he's done, what he said, that would lend itself into believing that he'd be view positively anything that sought to empower. But he doesn't want to be part of BRICS. He wants to weaken BRICS, and he has 3+ years. So I would just basically focus on the future. J.D. Vance is your man. I believe J.D. Vance is your man. I think he's unless Trump totally disintegrates politically and the Democrats suddenly have a magical revival, I think 48's name's going to be Vance.
Maybe J.D. Vance will become the Democratic Party nominee.
Anything's possible.
Can I add a thought on this?
That is small. I see you had your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a real important discussion. I mean, the one thing that one can say about Trump is what's true today very well may not be true tomorrow. But I think there's a really deeper issue here on this question, which is just as there is a reality on the ground in the military sphere, which you, Scott, and also you, Ray, have gone through in some detail, which is simply unavoidable. The reality is the reality, and the United States is going to have to deal with that and address it in a way that is positive for the U.S. There is similarly a reality on the ground in terms of what is happening with the global economy. It's a reality. It's not a question of a proposal. And just because people are often as unaware of that as they are about the statements of Putin, because they don't read that and they don't listen to what is happening in China or Brazil and so on, the reality is that in the same way that security is indivisible and must be, so too is economic development. Either economic development is indivisible, i.e., it is a win-win game for the good of the other, or it doesn't exist. And that applies to the United States as well as to anybody else. I think our problem here, and this is just a concluding point to go back to what Ray said a while back on the British. The problem is the British on this as on the security question. And it's of note that just as Boris Johnson was the guy who sabotaged the 2022 negotiations, we should keep our eye on Jonathan Powell, who is holding Zelensky's hand right now and guiding him on how to make sure this whole thing can be blown up. Jonathan Powell is, his older brother was the advisor to all the Labour Party prime ministers. He's been the top advisor, including, sorry, the other way around, the older brother to the Conservatives and then to the Labour Party, Jonathan Powell. And he's a Tony Blair man, and he is the national security advisor, and he's there on the ground. So the issue really is British policy on this and on the economic question. So I think that the broader point here, and this of course requires a whole broader discussion for which I'm sure the upcoming Schiller Institute conference will be the proper venue, is to look at the question of the indivisibility of economic development, just as security is also indivisible. Those are my thoughts.
Dennis Speed, I saw your hand raised.
I just something just to inform people of rather than have a conversation here because this goes way beyond our time. It's not the kind of thing. But there's a flank, something which is highly unusual, and it involves the new Pope and his taking the name of Leo the 13th and the Leo the 13th's writing of an encyclical in 1891 called Rerum Novarum. This encyclical, which is about capital and labor, but which it is apparently the case, we are checking this, so I just want people to be aware of this, came about as a result of an extensive discussion carried out by elements from Philadelphia, particularly Archbishop Patrick John Ryan and others with the Pope. There is circumstantial evidence that that encyclical was actually generated as a result of those discussions. Some of our researchers and background people are talking about this. There's a reason this is significant. A friend of ours, Alan Salisbury, now deceased, wrote a book a long time ago called The Civil War in the American System. What J.D. Vance is referring to continually around tariff policy comes from elements that J.D. Vance is not entirely aware of. A lot of it has to do with the Philadelphia School, and being people like Wharton Barker, who was the campaign manager for Garfield. Now there's a lot of discussion about Garfield and McKinley and so on. It comes through that channel, but mostly this is not understood what the origin of it is. The reason this becomes important is that you may see something begin to occur in and around circles in America, which will be astounding to you on questions of policy, particularly with respect to economic policy in the relatively short term. So I'm going to leave it at that because, and more can be discussed and will be discussed over the next 10 days to 2 weeks, including at our conference. But I thought I should just inform that of people because the notion of an American Pope, I don't care what people may think about the individual, but the notion of that is probably the most important change of that character in the Vatican in over 250 years. It's not the kind of thing you can analyze in the short term. It's not the kind of thing you can really say a lot about. But it will be up to what we and others of us do to determine how much of an impact this may be able to have. And I think in that regard, what Helga's talking about is properly placed kind of in a different context. It's a strategic question. It's the kind of thing will interest Ray mightily as we go down that road.
I'm sure he'll also be influencing the other way around as well. So yeah. Well, I just want to emphasize a couple points here. I don't know how much time you have, Scott, to continue on with the discussion, but I do just want to make the point that Scott Ritter will also be a speaker on the first panel at the conference. And let me just do one more appeal to people to make sure to register for the conference. Here we go. Here's the lovely image. And Scott, I can make sure to get this to you as well so you can share it around with various contacts and people that you're working with. The registration will be closing coming up. You must be registered by Saturday morning. So make sure to get registered today for the in-person. Online will be open, obviously, for the whole time, but we want to make sure everybody is registered and we know who people are because we do have top level folks coming in from all over the world. So we want to make sure it's safe and secure. So please, and thank you for understanding. So I just want to see if there's anything else from the discussion, whether from Scott, Ray, Helga, or Dennis's, before we move forward.
Can I just say something?
Go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
Totally out of the, I came in on the tail end of the Israeli gentleman's discussion, etc. And I heard Ray speak about action. I just want to, what's happening in Gaza is beyond genocide. The genocide against the Jews was civilized compared to what's happening right now. This is the kind of mass murder that is unprecedented in modern times. This is something that should never take place given technology. The world has abandoned the Palestinian people. They have been starved to death. They are out of food. The Israelis are deliberately bombing children, innocents. And I don't know what the answer is, but I would just say the business as usual is not the solution, because there's a mass murder taking place right before our very eyes, and I don't know if we can stop the mass murder, but if we're not focused on how to hold the murderer accountable, then we're doing the wrong thing. And I think, again, I'm not advocating anything other than the murderer must be held accountable in the eyes of humanity. And that means that the murderer, even if they successfully complete this crime, as tragically it appears they are going to do, because there's nobody standing up for these people at all. Nobody of significance, nobody who has the power to stop this is standing up. So this murder is going to take place. But the murderer must never be allowed to murder again. And hopefully people are thinking about how to bring that about, because this is as tragic as it gets. This is the Warsaw Ghetto writ large. This is what Nazi Germany did, magnified by orders of magnitude, because the Israelis should know better. The fact that they were born of the Holocaust, for them to be perpetrating a Holocaust, condemns them in the eyes of the world. And I just want to throw that in there because I don't know what to do. I'm powerless. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that I respect everybody's efforts to do anything, but for God's sake, getting people to meet and on the Green Line in Jerusalem isn't going to do a goddamn thing to save these people's lives. As we speak, dozens of Gazan children are being murdered right now, this moment, as we speak. And it pains me. This is the sort of thing that I'd be more than happy to put a uniform on and go and do my former business. But I'm not allowed to say that. Ray's putting his finger over his mouth and telling me to shut up. But
No.
I'm a man of peace up until the point where there's a reason to fight and die. And saving the children of Gaza is a reason to fight and die. That's it.
Now, Scott, I would just like to add what that very brave Air Force soldier airman did in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington. Aaron Bushnell, the latest recipient of the Sam Adams Award for Integrity. What he said was, hey, I asked myself, and maybe you ought to ask yourself, what would I do? What I do would if there were a civil war in the United States, or what if there was a Holocaust in Germany? Or what would I do if Gazans were being subjected to genocide? Well, you're doing it now, folks. You're doing it now, or you're not doing it now. So I would appeal as Scott does, because he's got a bigger heart than I do, but I have a big heart too. We got to do what we do to stop it. Otherwise, we're not doing anything now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. Well, I just want to, I mean, just from my standpoint and what people can do immediately, there's been a lot of interventions going on. I'm sure people saw the intervention that was made on RFK Jr. just the other day by uh, Ben Cohen, which was excellent. I think we need more of these kinds of things. Jose Vega, who has done, God, last count, I think it was like 45, 50 interventions, myself being one of them. I can only say that I've done maybe 5 or so of those. But I think that it's very important that people do these kinds of actions, especially in the US, but in other places as well. Nonviolent direct action, going in there and taking action. I see Dennis Speed, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to do this in 60 seconds. Make sure it's in 60 seconds. First of all, we're doing a conference in 9 days, which is all about addressing that. In fact, panel 3 of the conference is all organized around deploying people from the conference into what's going to be happening at the United Nations on June 2nd through 4th. That can include all kinds of things, including things on the street, various actions. Number one. Number two, the International Peace Coalition has had over 2,000 people on these calls over the course of that 102 meetings. If all of those people converge on next Saturday, when we are going to be having the Schiller Institute that is having that conference, Scott, you're speaking, Ray's speaking. You can say whatever you wish to say there. And the issue there involved is that the people can deploy from that. Also, it was already mentioned by Anastasia, the business concerning the interventions. I think, essentially, and then there's other things. Jose, I think, is probably around. He may have some things to say concerning how that interventions process can work exactly on this point. We had some interactions with the Doctors Against Genocide before they were created, by the way, which helped to precipitate that. So I think there are things, and I think also the whole idea is it's not the individual things, it's the concept. What people have been missing is the concept of who they are. They talk about, see, the issue is who are we? And how do we represent or how do we express our own humanity? I think that's the issue. And it has to be that new forms have to come about, which we have to invent now, of political intervention. And they're different than people have done before, but they're knowable. And so I just wanted to say that and leave it at that because this is the only meeting we'll be having. I guess we didn't say that yet, right, Anastasia? We're not having a meeting next Friday. It'll be
No, I announced it earlier that we would be
did say
having it on Saturday, that
say
everyone should join Saturday morning for the regular IPC scheduled meeting.
okay. That's it.
All right, is there, I
But,
just want to,
but to be clear, that IPC meeting will not be held on this Zoom link. Join the Schiller Institute conference. The two are converging, just so there's no confusion.
Right. Exactly.
Go ahead, Anastasia.
all right, yeah, I'll include all of the links in the chat for people to go to it. If you're not on the Zoom meeting right now, go to schillerinstitute.com and you'll find it there. But I'll make sure everybody is able to get that RSVP here on the Zoom. There we go. There it is. Okay. So unless there's anything else from the panel, I think we have a bunch of questions which have come in. Is there anything else, responses that people have before we move forward? All right, I'll take that as a no. So we're going to be going into the discussion period. Thank you, everybody, for being part of the audience. We are going to be going to you. If you are on YouTube, Rumble, wherever else you are. I forget all the different platforms that are streaming this. But if you are on a different platform and not on Zoom, you can register to have a discussion with the panelists today. Go to schillerinstitute.com. Right on the top of the page, you'll see on the slider, there is the International Peace Coalition registration page, and you'll get the link to join the Zoom meeting. You must be registered to join this meeting, obviously because of harassment that we've had in the past. If you're not really doing anything, you're not going to get harassed. So good thing we're doing a lot here. So with that, just let me know, Dave, when we've cut the stream, and then